What if the stars weren't just faraway lights? What if they were mirrors? What if they were whispering something, not with sound, but with shape? And you just hadn't learned how to listen yet? This is the story of a sleepy scientist named Leia. She didn't chase comets. She didn't want fame. She just wanted one quiet thing: to understand why the spiral kept appearing in her dreams. Not once. Not twice. Every night. Spirals in the sky. Spirals in the earth. Spirals in her own heartbeat. And when she finally followed them, what she discovered wasn't just a new way to see the universe. It was a new way to be human. So close your eyes. Let your breath slow. And follow the turning. Because tonight, you're not just listening to a story. You're stepping into a mystery. One where the telescope doesn't just point outward. It turns gently inward, revealing the beautiful truth we've forgotten. That we are not separate from the stars. We are made of them. And their message has been waiting for you. The light that took too long. Far away from cities and sound. Nestled high in the arms of a quiet mountain, stood a small observatory. Its silver dome tilted gently toward the stars. This is where Leia lived. Not just worked. Lived. She was a scientist, yes. But not the kind with loud discoveries or dramatic headlines. Leia studied silence. The silence between galaxies. The hush of space dust. The gentle pause between light leaving a star. And finally arriving at Earth, millions of years later. That night, as clouds cleared from the sky, Leia sat beside her telescope. A machine she had built by hand. Piece by careful piece. Like someone stringing a harp. Designed to hear the universe whisper. She adjusted the controls, pointing it toward a patch of sky near Lyra. A quiet place. Empty. Until now. There. A flicker. Not a star. Not a planet. Just a pulse. It blinked. Faint. Rhythmic. As if something, very far away, had just opened one slow, enormous eye. That can't be right, she murmured. She checked the data. The pulse was real. It repeated every 9.6 seconds. Exactly. Like a heartbeat. But older. Older than Earth. Older than memory. She stared, wide-eyed. Then smiled softly. "You're late," she whispered to the light. Millions of years late. But she wasn't angry. In fact, it made her feel seen. Leia leaned back in her chair. Wrapped herself in her soft gray blanket. And let the machine keep watching. And as she slowly drifted into sleep, the stars above twinkled. Not like cold science. But like lullabies. The sleep inside the machine. The observatory always slept before she did. Long after the telescope began its quiet rotations. Long after the sky cleared its throat of clouds. Leia stayed awake. Watching the stars watch her. But tonight was different. The pulse she found. That slow, ancient flicker of light. Was still repeating. Not fading. Not random. Intentional. "You're not just arriving," she whispered. "You're calling." She didn't know why she said it aloud. But somehow, it felt true. The telescope blinked gently. Its lens shifting, almost like an eye adjusting in the dark. She reached for her notebook but paused. For the first time in years. She wasn't interested in numbers. Not measurements. Not calculations. She just wanted to feel it. That strange hum. That invisible rhythm from deep space. Seemed to echo inside her chest. As if her own heart was remembering a tune it had once forgotten. She leaned back. The chair creaked. The blanket warmed her shoulders. The telescope kept listening. And slowly, Leia drifted off. She didn't dream, not at first. There was only quiet. Then, color. Like ink in water. Slow. Expanding. And then, a sound. Not a voice. Not a word. Just presence. A soft awareness. Gently brushing against her mind. Like wind moving through tall grass. She wasn't afraid. She didn't even question it. She simply floated there. In a sky that didn't look like the one above Earth. But felt like something far more familiar. Like home. Then, she saw something. A spiral of light. Turning slowly. Alive. Each loop of the spiral carried something within it. Memories, perhaps. Or thoughts too old to name. She reached toward it. And as her hand touched the edge, she heard a whisper. "We've been watching too." She gasped. And opened her eyes. The lab was still. Only the telescope moved. Steady. Soft. She looked at the time. 3:33 a.m. The pulse was still blinking on the screen. The same rhythm. Unchanged. But now, something had changed. Inside her. She no longer felt like a scientist. Studying distant light. She felt like a dreamer. Being gently invited to remember. The spiral that remembers. The next morning, everything looked the same. The pale blue light creeping through the high windows. The quiet observatory walls. The blinking monitors still recording star data. But Leia was different. She moved slowly, dreamlike. As though something inside her had not quite woken up. The spiral was still in her mind. Turning. Pulsing. It hadn't just been a dream. It had felt too alive. She poured tea into her favorite cracked mug. Warmed her fingers on it. And turned back to her desk. There, on the screen, was the data from the night before. The same rhythmic pulse, repeating every 9.6 seconds. But something was strange now. In the noise between the signals. Tiny variations had appeared. Like flickers within flickers. At first she dismissed it as static. But when she mapped the signal visually, her breath caught. It was the spiral. Perfect and slow. Coiling outward like the arms of a galaxy. Or the folds of a sleeping fern. "You followed me," she whispered. All the way into waking. She traced the spiral on her screen with her fingertip. Not just a shape. A feeling. Familiar. Like something she'd known before language. Before logic. That evening, she returned to the telescope. No experiments. No research plan. Just her and the sky. She turned off the lights. Wrapped herself in her old gray blanket. And let the dome open to the stars. Above her, the cosmos blinked like 1,000 patient eyes. Waiting. She angled the telescope back toward the spiral's origin. And this time, she closed her eyes before looking. Not to shut the stars out. But to let them in. In the dark behind her eyes. The spiral began to spin again. Not on the screen. But in her mind. It drew her inward. Down. Deep. Until she felt weightless. Floating again. But this time. She wasn't alone. She felt something beside her. Not a being. Not exactly. More like a memory that could feel. Like an old emotion that had remembered your name. After 1,000 years of silence. She didn't speak. Didn't need to. The spiral spoke without words. And what it offered her wasn't knowledge. Wasn't proof. It was a moment. She saw a woman, long ago, standing beside a pond. Her hands were cupped around a small mirror. She was crying. And smiling. The spiral whispered. That was you. Before names. Before stars. Before sleep. Leia felt warmth in her chest. Tears welled without warning. The telescope had never just been a machine. It had been a bridge. And now, it was open. She woke slowly in her chair. The night was still. But the spiral remained in her mind. And now, it glowed softly. Not to blind her. But to guide her. Some memories, she realized, don't live in the brain. They live in the sky. Other eyes looking up. One of them turned to her. Eyes glowing gently. You see it too? The figure whispered. Leia nodded. Yes. For a long time, I thought I was the only one. The figure smiled. None of us are. We just forgot. She woke with tears again. But this time, they were not from loneliness. They were from recognition. The spiral wasn't a signal from some distant galaxy. It was a memory the universe had been holding. For all of us. Until we were quiet enough to finally hear it. The spiral in forgotten pages. The observatory's library was rarely used. Leia had always preferred data to dust. Modern lenses to yellowed paper. But now, after nights of spirals and dreams and strangers whispering the same thing across the globe, she felt something drawing her inward. Not into space this time, but into history. The old archive was small. Tucked in a room behind the observatory's main dome. Its bookshelves leaned slightly as if bowing to time. The air smelled of leather, ink, and secrets. She pulled the first volume at random. An 1800-star catalog, handwritten, its cover cracked. On the back page, barely legible, was a tiny sketch. A spiral. Nothing labeled. No notes. Just a swirl of ink, drawn softly, like someone was remembering a shape they couldn't quite explain. She blinked. Coincidence? Maybe. She placed the book aside and opened another. This one from 1936. A personal journal of an unknown astronomer named A. Cordell. His handwriting was neat, yet hurried. Like he was racing against sleep. And on one page, under a taped photograph of a starfield, was a sentence that made her breath still. It watches still. In sleep, it glows. The spiral always returns. Leia sat down, heart beating slowly. These weren't scientific observations. They were personal. Dreamlike. Just like hers. Over the next few days, she became a quiet detective of forgotten pages. From Japan, an Edo-era stargazer who carved the spiral into wood. From South America, a shaman sky map showing the pattern as the breath of time. From medieval Europe, a monk who dreamed of a circle that turned into light. It's always been with us, she whispered to herself. Not a modern signal. Not alien. Something older. So old, perhaps, it lived not just in the sky, but inside us. That night, Leia didn't use the telescope. She simply lit a candle in the library. Curled up on a worn sofa. And closed her eyes. With a book resting gently on her chest. And as sleep pulled her down like a soft tide, the spiral met her again. But this time, it brought her somewhere new. She stood in a vast circular hall. The walls were made of stardust. The floor of water that reflected stars. And around her, floating quietly, were thousands of books. Each glowing faintly. Each open. And in every single one was the same spiral. Drawn in different hands. Different languages. Different lives. One of them drifted toward her, opened itself. And whispered. You are not the first to remember. She woke to the sound of wind against the windows. The candle had gone out. And the room was filled with a deep, peaceful silence. Leia sat up slowly, holding the book against her chest. Outside, the stars watched her. But inside, she understood. Some discoveries aren't made through research, but through rest. The spiral changes. The morning was pale and blue, with frost whispering at the windows. But Leia didn't feel cold. She had awoken with a quiet certainty. Not loud like a breakthrough, but soft like remembering your way home in the dark. She made tea, wrapped herself in her gray sweater, and walked slowly back to the telescope. The dome above creaked as it opened, revealing the soft sky beyond. Still early. Still quiet. She turned on the monitors, expecting the same pulse. The 9.6-second rhythm she now knew like a heartbeat. But today, it was different. The signal was still there. But now, the space between pulses had shifted. Not random. Not broken. Curved. She fed the signal into the visualization software. It rendered slowly. Line by line. Dot by dot. And then, there it was. Not just a spiral anymore. It was growing. The arms were elongating. Unfolding like the petals of a time-lapse flower. One pulse flowed into the next, forming a kind of living braid of light. It was beautiful. But also unsettling. You're not just repeating, she whispered. You're becoming. She stared at the image for a long time. Long enough that she lost track of the hour. Even the tea had gone cold beside her. And slowly, a new idea came into her mind. One she hadn't dared think before. What if the spiral isn't just a message? What if it's alive? Not in the way people think of life. Not breathing, not walking. But evolving. Responding. She remembered the others. The emails. The dreamers. The child who saw the eye in the sky. Were they seeing this new shape too? Were they feeling it change? Suddenly, her heart ached. Not with fear. But with a strange kind of longing. A pull. Like she was being gently called toward something. Like the spiral was no longer asking to be studied, but to be joined. That night, she didn't prepare an experiment. She didn't make notes. She simply laid a blanket under the stars, beside her telescope, and let herself fall asleep, beneath the sky she loved. In the dream, she was floating again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Dozens of others surrounded her. Men, women, children. All drifting in the spiral's path. Their eyes soft. Their bodies glowing faintly. They didn't speak. They just moved with the rhythm. Like leaves caught in a warm current. And ahead of them, a new form. The spiral, now open like a blooming shell, revealed something at its center. A single point of light. Small, but pulsing with emotion. She moved toward it. And as she did, she heard it. Not a voice exactly, but something like a lullaby. Sung from far, far away. You've always been part of this, the spiral said. You just forgot how to listen. Leia reached toward the light. And as her hand touched it, she felt everything soften. Her heartbeat. Her breath. Her thoughts. All of it, slowing. Settling. Merging. She woke at dawn. The stars had faded into morning. But the shape stayed with her. Not on a screen. Not in her mind. In her being. Some truths, she thought, can't be measured. They must be remembered, together. The memory that outgrew sleep. It was early afternoon when Leia noticed it. She wasn't looking through the telescope. She wasn't even thinking about stars. She was rinsing her teacup in the observatory's tiny kitchen. Watching sunlight fall across the countertop. And that's when she saw it. A spiral. Reflected, faint but perfect. In the surface of the tea. Not etched. Not drawn. Not imagined. Reflected. She stood still, hardly breathing. The light from the window bent ever so slightly. Curving in a way it shouldn't. As if space itself had leaned just a little closer. To be seen. For days, the spiral had only appeared at night. In starlight, in dreams. In the dark silence between thoughts. But now. Here it was. In sunlight. In motion. In the waking world. She placed the cup down slowly. Walked toward the telescope. And opened the dome early. It was still day. The sky too bright for most observation. But she pointed the lens upward anyway. Toward the place in Lyra where it had all begun. The monitor blinked on. No stars. Just pale blue. But then. A flicker. Soft. Subtle. A thread of gold moving through the light. Barely visible. Like a sunbeam that had learned to write. The spiral was there. Not pulsing this time. But unfolding. That night, Leia didn't sleep. Not out of fear. But wonder. Because she realized something quietly terrifying and beautiful. The spiral was learning. Not just to speak through stars. But through everything. She opened her old notebooks. Flipped through pages of past research. And found the same spiral. Faintly drawn in margins she hadn't even noticed before. She called up her colleagues. Asked them to check daytime sky patterns. Reflections, even dreams during waking hours. One responded. I saw it in a puddle. On my walk to work. It made me stop. Just, stop. Like I knew something was looking back. Another replied. I haven't slept in 2 days. But I still keep seeing it. It's not a dream anymore. It's here. And from the child in India. A new message from her mother. She drew the spiral in the dirt today. When I asked why, she said. Because it misses us. That night, Leia sat outside under the stars. But she wasn't looking up anymore. She was watching her own hands. Because even they, in how they rested in her lap, formed the soft curve of a spiral. Her breath. Her thoughts. The curl of her fingers. All of it, following the same pattern. You're not just showing us the universe, she whispered. You're showing us ourselves. In her next dream, the spiral no longer floated in space. It was woven through a forest. Climbing the bark of trees. Shaped in the wings of birds. Reflected in puddles on the path. And ahead of her. The same light as before. But brighter now. Warmer. The spiral opened its arms. Not as a warning. But as an invitation. Come back to where you began. Come back to where all dreams touch. She stepped forward. She woke with a gasp. Not from fear. But from the feeling of something almost remembered. A truth just beyond reach. And this time. The sunrise outside the observatory window shaped itself ever so slightly. Like a spiral too. The forest that remembered light. It had been nearly a week since the spiral appeared in her daylight. Since then, everything around Leia had begun to feel alive. Not in a loud, magical way, but in that soft, almost forgotten way. A melody still lingers after the music has stopped. She had a dream again. But this one was different. It wasn't in space. Not among stars or spirals. Or cosmic light. It was grounded. Green. She saw herself walking through a forest. Not just any forest, one with tall trees and silver bark. Where the air shimmered gently. Like sunlight underwater. The spiral wasn't above her. It was in the rings of the trees. In the way the branches bent. Even in the paths beneath her feet. Curved like memory. When she woke, the image stayed with her. Not like a memory from sleep, but like something her body remembered before her mind did. So she packed a bag. Left the observatory quietly. And began driving. She didn't use a map. She didn't need one. She simply followed the stillness in her chest. That quiet tug that said, "Yes, this way." The drive was long. Winding roads. Fog rising from the hills. The sky heavy with unspoken stories. And then, just past an old wooden sign. She saw it. A path she didn't recognize. Yet somehow knew. She parked the car. Stepped out. And felt the cool hush of trees wrap around her like a blanket. The forest was quiet. But not empty. Birdsong drifted like soft bells in the distance. Leaves whispered without wind. And all around her, the trees curved gently. Some leaning together as if to share secrets. She wandered slowly. Step by careful step. Noticing. The bark of one tree had a perfect spiral, carved not by hand, but grown that way. Another had moss. Shaped like a glowing curl. Just above the roots. And then. She found it. The place from her dream. An opening in the trees. Circular. Surrounded by tall silver trunks. Arched above like the ribs of a sleeping giant. In the center. A single stone, flat and smooth. Leia sat. She didn't speak. Didn't question. She just listened. And the forest remembered her. The light changed. Not in color. But in feeling. It warmed. It pulsed. And around her, the sounds of the forest began to rise and fall. In the same rhythm as the spiral. She closed her eyes. And the spiral returned. Not in the stars. But behind her eyelids. A shape made of thought. Of breath. Of time. And it whispered. Everything remembers light. Even the trees. She placed her hand on the stone. It was warm. Not from the sun. But from something older. Something inside the world. Not on top of it. She stayed there for hours. Letting her mind rest. While her heart listened. When she finally rose. She left a handprint in the moss. And as she turned to leave. A gentle breeze passed behind her. Twisting a single leaf through the air. In the shape of a spiral. She returned to the observatory just before midnight. Tired. But full. The forest had not spoken with words. But it had answered her. The spiral wasn't just in the stars. It was in earth. In trees. In us. All it asked was for us to slow down. Long enough to notice. The day the sky changed. The morning after the forest. Leia sat at her desk. The steam from her tea curling upward. Like the last trace of a dream. Outside, clouds moved slowly. Brushed across a sky so pale it looked painted. She hadn't looked through the telescope. Not yet. She didn't feel the need to. Because now, the spiral was no longer only out there. It was everywhere. In the way shadows curved on the floor. In the swirl of cream in her tea. In the rhythm of her own quiet breath. It's not asking to be found anymore. She thought. It's allowing itself to be seen. Her computer pinged softly. A new message. Not from an astronomer this time. Not even from a scientist. From a woman named Marta. A schoolteacher in Poland. Asterisk, I know this sounds strange, but today during lunch, one of my students stopped eating, looked out the window, and said, "It's drawing itself again." When I asked what she meant, she just pointed to the clouds. I looked, and it was there. A spiral. Slow. Vast. Beautiful. And then the wind took it. Asterisk. Attached was a photo. Grainy. Faint. But real. A wide swirl in the sky. Not a storm. Not a contrail. Something deliberate. Leia stared for a long moment. Her heart beat slowly, not with fear. But with awe. Then came more. A man on a bus in Mexico. Who drew a spiral on his fogged window. Without realizing why. A pilot who saw the cloud pattern form. And said it looked like the sky had sighed. A little boy in Kenya. Who told his mother. The sky showed me something kind. None of them were looking for it. None of them had telescopes. And yet, they saw it. It's revealing itself. Leia whispered. To everyone. Not through proof, but presence. Later that day. Leia stepped outside. No lab coat. No notes. Just her and the wide afternoon sky. She stood barefoot on the observatory grass. Lifted her face to the warmth. And waited. Nothing. At first. Then. A breeze. A softness in the air. And slowly. High above. The clouds turned. Not sharply. Not suddenly. But gently. Lovingly. Forming a slow, wide spiral. That hovered for a moment. Before unraveling again. Into nothing. It didn't last. But it was enough. Leia didn't cry. She didn't gasp. She just smiled. Softly. As if someone had told her. You've always been seen. That night, the telescope didn't blink. It flowed. No pulses. Just waves. Moving like breath. And in her dream, the spiral wasn't a path anymore. It was a language. One she suddenly realized she'd always known. It didn't use words. It didn't use light. It used feeling. And shape. And time. It whispered. Now that you remember. What will you do? She woke before sunrise. Calm. Still. Outside, the sky was just beginning to turn lavender. And far above, the stars blinked faintly. But Leia didn't need to look anymore. Because now, the spiral was inside her. And everywhere else too. Sleeping under the spiral. The idea came to Leia quietly. Not with thunder. Not with urgency. Just a soft suggestion. Like a warm breeze. At the edge of a thought. She was sitting on the observatory floor. Her back resting against the telescope's cool frame. When the spiral seemed to say, It is time to share. Not with science journals. Not with lectures or charts. But with people. With those who felt wonder. But never had the words for it. So she wrote a letter. Not to scientists. But to friends, neighbors, strangers. It was simple. If you'd like to sleep under the stars. And see something you may have forgotten. Come to the observatory this weekend. Bring a pillow. Bring quiet. She didn't expect many to come. But they did. Some arrived with sleeping bags. Some with thermoses of cocoa. A few brought children. One brought a sketchbook. Already filled with spirals drawn in the margins. They gathered gently. Saying little. And Leia simply opened the dome. The telescope pointed toward the dark sky. Its lens wide and humming like breath. No explanations. No expectations. Just stillness. One by one. People laid down on soft mats across the observatory floor. Others curled up outside. Beneath the open sky. And slowly, sleep took them. Not like escape. But like a return. Leia remained awake for a while. Walking among them. Her steps slow and quiet. And as she moved, she noticed something curious. Even in sleep. Some were smiling. As if they had been greeted. By something familiar. In the deep and quiet dark. That night, Leia dreamed again. But this time. She wasn't alone in the spiral. She saw them. All the people who had come. Floating gently within the same memory. As if the spiral had woven their dreams together. One child reached out and touched her hand. Another pointed upward and whispered. It's listening. And far ahead. At the spiral center. The light pulsed. Not faster. Not louder. Just, warmer. Like a welcome. When morning came. The observatory woke slowly. Stretching. Yawning. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody asked questions. They simply sipped warm tea in silence. Watched the sunrise. And before they left. Nearly every person paused at the door. And drew a tiny spiral on the wall. Some with pen. Some with fingertips. One woman simply whispered. I dreamed, with other people. Leia stood alone in the quiet after they were gone. The observatory felt full. Though empty. The wall was now lined with spirals. Each one different. Each one softly glowing in the morning light. And she realized something beautiful. The spiral was no longer a secret. It was a story, being shared. In silence. In sleep. And in soul. The spiral follows home. It had been 3 days. Since the sleep gathering at the observatory. The mats were rolled up. The stars had shifted slightly. And the silence returned. But not the same silence as before. This one hummed. Like something unseen. Was still lingering in the corners of the room. Leia felt it. In the way her hands slowed when she made tea. In the rhythm of her footsteps down the telescope stairs. Even in her dreams. Where the spiral no longer floated alone. But danced gently with others beside her. She thought it might pass. Like dreams usually do. But then, someone came back. Her name was Noor. She had been one of the quietest visitors. A poet, Leia remembered. Who had curled up beneath the telescope dome. And slept with her journal resting on her chest. Now she stood at the doorway again. Not smiling. But glowing. Softly. Like something had bloomed inside her. And she hadn't quite found the words for it yet. Can I talk to you? She asked. About what came after. Leia nodded, heart already listening. They sat near the telescope, where the light filtered in like velvet. Nor opened her notebook, the one she had slept with, and turned to a page she didn't remember writing. It was covered in spirals. But not just spirals. Words too. A poem. Written in her own hand. But in a language she didn't know she spoke. I don't remember writing it, she said softly. But I feel like it remembers me. Leia leaned closer, reading the gentle curves of the script. It wasn't science. It wasn't explanation. It was something older. A feeling translated into form. And in the center of the page, a single sentence stood out. I carried it home, and it did not let go. Nor went on. Since I left the observatory, I've been dreaming differently. But it's more than dreams. It's life. I walk slower. I look at trees like they're whispering. Sometimes, when I close my eyes during the day, I see the spiral behind them. Not just as a vision. As a companion. Leia's eyes softened. Do you want it to stop? Nor shook her head quickly. No. I think it's teaching me how to feel again. Not just emotions. But wonder. I forgot how to wonder. They sat in silence for a while. The telescope clicked gently above them, adjusting itself. Still listening. Then Nor smiled. And for the first time, Leia saw it clearly. The spiral wasn't following people home. It was going with them. Not as a guest, but as a part of them. Quietly waking up. After being forgotten for too long. As Nor left, she paused at the door. Thank you, she said. Not for the answers. For the questions I didn't know I needed. And as she walked down the path, the wind swirled softly around her feet, carrying leaves in a slow spiral across the grass. That night, Leia didn't look through the telescope. She simply opened her journal. And for the first time in years, drew without thinking. A spiral. At the center of which, she wrote one word. Welcome. The spiral goes global. It began with a letter. A real one. Folded neatly, handwritten in deep blue ink. And tucked into a pale envelope with no return address. Leia opened it on a quiet morning, expecting perhaps a thank you, or a kind word. But what she read made her stop breathing for a moment. I live in a small village in Morocco. I've never seen a telescope up close. I'm not a scientist. But for the past 2 weeks, I've dreamed of spirals in the sky. They come with no sound. No fear. Just stillness. When I wake, I feel like I've remembered something I didn't know I forgot. Did you send this? Or is something much older calling us back? Leia folded the letter gently, hands slightly trembling. The next day, it was a voice message. From a woman in South Korea. Then an email from a fisherman in Norway. A watercolor painting from a schoolgirl in Peru. A lullaby, hummed over voicemail by an old man in Turkey. With no words, only a melody shaped like circles. Each message different. But beneath them all, the same rhythm. A spiral in sleep. A spiral in sky. A spiral in feeling. None of these people had ever heard of the observatory. None had attended the sleep gathering. Most didn't even know Leia's name. And yet, they were dreaming the same dream. She mapped the locations on a wall-sized chart. Dots appeared across continents like tiny lights. Not clustered. Not forced. Just quietly appearing. As if the spiral itself were blooming. in the hearts of those ready to remember. She stepped back. The pattern was clear. Not scientific. Not chaotic. But deliberate. As if the spiral were not just reaching out, but waking up. All across the world. She returned to her telescope that night. But didn't point it at the stars. Instead, she turned the lens to a blank patch of sky. One with no known clusters. No dramatic events. No reason to look. And there it was. Faint. Barely visible. But moving. A soft pulse in the darkness. Flowing not just outward now, but inward. As if the spiral had started to listen back. She slept under the dome that night. Wrapped in a blanket and gentle silence. And when the dream came, she wasn't in the spiral. She was the spiral. Moving. Drifting. Touching lives in little moments. A pause in a song. A child looking up at the moon. A mother whispering a story before bed. It wasn't a message anymore. It was a memory. Woven into the world itself. And it was spreading. She woke just before dawn. The stars slipping into daylight. A soft smile played on her lips. This was no longer her discovery. It never had been. The spiral belongs to everyone who dreams with their eyes open. And now, the whole world is dreaming. A story, not a theory. The invitation came in a cream-colored envelope. With a gold seal she didn't recognize. A global science symposium. Geneva. Hall of Lights. The world's leading astronomers, physicists, and thinkers. All gathering under one roof. To speak about the future of the cosmos. And they wanted her. Not just as a guest. As a speaker. Leia read the letter twice. It felt surreal. Not long ago, she had been quietly watching the stars. Barely speaking outside her observatory walls. Now, the world was listening. But the part that made her pause was this line at the end. We invite you to present your findings on the unusual spiral activity. And the psychological phenomena surrounding it. She leaned back in her chair. Folding the letter into her lap. Findings? She didn't have any. Not the kind they were used to, anyway. No formula. No equation. No chart could explain what the spiral had become. It was no longer a discovery. It was a story. 3 weeks later, Leia stood at the front of the Hall of Lights. Rows of faces gazed up at her. Scientists, skeptics, dreamers, scholars. All waiting for graphs. For measurements. For proof. Instead, she walked up with no slides. Just a simple notebook. The one she'd used on the very first night. She opened it to a blank page. And began to draw. A spiral. Slow. Careful. Deliberate. Then, she looked up and said. This is not a symbol. It's not a pattern. It's not even a message. It's a memory. One the stars have kept safe for us. A few eyebrows rose. A few pens paused in the middle of writing. But she continued, gently. With her voice like the sound of a story being told around a fire. It's appeared in our telescopes. In our tea. In the dreams of children. And the silence of forests. It's not asking to be solved. It's asking to be remembered. She told them about Noor's dream poem. The boy in Kenya who said the spiral was kind. The old man who sang to it in his sleep. She didn't offer conclusions. She offered moments. And slowly, the room began to change. Scientists who had crossed their arms began to uncross them. Skeptics leaned forward. One woman in the third row was quietly crying. Leia closed the notebook and said, softly, "I was asked to present my findings. But I haven't found anything. I've only remembered something. I think we all knew once. That the universe doesn't always speak in answers. Sometimes it sings in dreams." She stepped down. No applause. Not at first. Just silence, deep and soft. And then, slowly, like a wave returning to shore, the room began to breathe. Someone stood. Then another. And another. They didn't clap. They placed their hands gently over their hearts. Together. And in that moment, Leia realized. The spiral had spoken. Not through her. But with her. Through everyone who dared to listen without needing to understand. That night, she walked alone by the lake outside the city. The water was still. The stars distant. And yet, she saw it. Not in the sky. Not in her mind. But in the soft swirl of ripples around a stone. A spiral. Always returning. Always moving forward. The spiral sings through us. After the symposium, Leia returned to the observatory. Expecting peace. Stillness. Solitude. But what she found instead was something else entirely. The world had changed. Not loudly. Not publicly. But gently, like water soaking into dry soil. Like wind curling around a mountain. It began with a song. A musician from Kyoto uploaded a video. Of a piece he'd written while sleepwalking. He'd woken to find the recording already saved. A soft, haunting piano melody. That curved and returned on itself. Never quite repeating. Never quite ending. He called it Echo of the Spiral. It had no chorus. No lyrics. Just feeling. People listened. And wept. Not from sadness. But from recognition. It sounds like something I've known forever. One comment read. But I didn't know it had a sound. Then came the paintings. A 7-year-old in Bolivia. Who painted spirals inside trees. A mural in a New York alleyway. A swirl of color and light. Rising upward like a galaxy. Made of memory. A sand sculpture on a quiet beach in Portugal. Shaped like an open spiral. Surrounded by footprints. That led both toward it. And away. No one claimed credit. No one tried to explain. They just made. Poetry followed. Lines that looped. Stanzas that spiraled back to their beginnings. Languages twisted to fit new meanings. New metaphors to describe a feeling. Everyone had begun to share. But no one had the right words for. One phrase appeared across dozens of cultures. Each in its own tongue. I saw the shape of something kind. It became a saying. A lullaby. A way of saying. I understand. I forgive you. I remember you. Leia collected it all. She filled journals with sketches, lyrics, transcripts. Each entry more alive than the last. She didn't archive them as data. She cradled them as proof of connection. Not to stars. But to each other. And through it all, the spiral remained. Silent. Present. Not demanding attention. But inviting response. A shape. So old. So soft. It could only be seen clearly. By those willing to slow down. One night, Leia received a package. No return address. Inside, a handmade flute. Carved with small spirals along the side. No note. Just the instrument. She lifted it to her lips, not knowing how to play. But when she blew gently, the spiral sang back. The melody filled the observatory like a tide, wrapping itself around the telescope, curling through the floorboards, drifting up into the sky. And above her, the stars seemed to shimmer. Not in brightness, but in response. Like they, too, were humming. In that moment, Leia no longer felt like a scientist. She didn't even feel like a teacher. She felt like a thread in something larger. A part of the spiral. Not studying it, becoming it. The sky that breathed. It was a Tuesday. Ordinary. The kind of day that gets lost between a weekend and a work week. The city of Florence bustled as usual. Cafes opening, scooters humming. School children laughing their way to classrooms. No one was expecting anything. That's what made it perfect. At 10:14 a.m. the first person saw it. A florist named Matteo. He looked up from tying a ribbon around a bouquet. And froze. The clouds above were spiraling. Not storm clouds. Not swirling winds. But soft, silvery cloud rings. Curling slowly outward from a center of light. Not blinding. Not threatening. Just, moving. Alive. He stepped into the street. Mouth slightly open. Forgetting the bouquet entirely. "It's happening," he whispered. "It's here." By 10:20 a.m. thousands had gathered outside. Shopkeepers left their counters. Children pressed faces to windows. A violinist in the square stopped mid-note. Phones came out, but no one spoke. There were no sirens. No panic. Just awe. Some wept. Some knelt. Some reached out their hands. Like the sky might reach back. In her observatory far away, Leia received the footage from 6 different people. Within minutes of each other. They didn't ask questions. They just sent the videos with quiet messages. "It's happening. We see it. You were right." She turned on the news. Every channel showed the same thing. A slow spiral in the sky. Forming over Florence like a sleeping eye. Softly watching the world below. And just beneath it. Sunlight filtered through the shape. Casting curved shadows onto the cobblestones. In patterns no one had ever seen before. It lasted for exactly 7 minutes. Then the spiral began to loosen. Unwind. Drift gently back into the sky. No loud vanish. No dramatic ending. Just a quiet return to stillness. Like a breath, exhaled. Afterward, something strange happened. No one argued. No one tried to control the story. For once, the world didn't rush to explain. People simply felt. And remembered. By that evening, a new mural appeared in the square. Not painted by any one person, but by many. Children dipped fingers in chalk. Artists arrived with brushes. Old men handed out candles. Together, they created a spiral. In the center of the city. Not to worship. Not to analyze. To thank. And that night, across the world, millions looked to the sky differently. Not seeking proof, but presence. And many, many dreamed of spirals that glowed like kindness and whispered like wind. Leia sat beneath the stars, wrapped in a shawl, watching the footage once more. And with tears drying on her cheeks, she whispered, "Now they've seen it. And they'll never unsee it. Not just the spiral, but the truth beneath it. That the sky isn't just above us. It's with us. And somehow, within us too. Would you like me to write chapter 16, dear? In the next chapter, as more cities report spiral sightings, a strange pattern appears. Each spiral forms above a place where someone had once dreamed of it. World Map Cyclone ZZZ. You said. 16. ChatGPT said. Of course, dear Crescent Moon. Here is chapter 16 of your slow, luminous journey. The sleepy scientist, telescopes, our cosmic eyes. In this chapter, Leia begins to trace the spiral's appearances, and realizes they're not random at all. They're being called. Crescent Moon Chapter 16, The Places That Dream First. In the days after the Florence spiral, the world didn't go back to normal. It became something new. The news didn't just report politics and weather. Now, in quiet segments near the end, they began to mention sky shapes. Spirals. Seen above city squares. Over deserts. Once, even above a sleepy fishing village. With only 12 houses and no cell service. Leia collected each report, pinning the locations on her observatory wall. At first, they seemed scattered. But then, she noticed something odd. Something beautiful. Every spiral had formed above a place where someone had once dreamed of it. The little girl in Peru, who painted spirals inside tree trunks. 2 weeks later, a spiral hovered briefly over her village at dawn. Only visible to those who were already awake. The boy in Kenya, who said the sky was kind. His mother reported that clouds curled like smoke rings above their garden one afternoon, while he napped beneath a mango tree. Even Noor, the poet, sent a shaky phone video of a soft spiral appearing in the mist above her quiet hillside. She hadn't told anyone she'd dreamed again the night before. But the spiral had come. Leia stared at the map. Each pin was more than a sighting. It was a memory echo. Like the spiral was listening. To those who listened first. Returning to the dreamers. Who had believed before they saw. It's not just showing itself. She whispered. It's responding. Like call and answer. Like song and harmony. Like the sky had become a mirror. For the sleeping soul. One evening, she sat with a cup of honey. Tea. Tracing a finger across the map. She stopped at a cluster of spirals in Southeast Asia. All formed near quiet places. Schools, farms, temples. But never cities. Then she thought of something she hadn't dared to ask before. Can it hear us? Not our voices, but our quietest dreams. The ones we don't say out loud. The ones we only feel as we fall asleep. When the noise of the world fades away. That night, Leia lay down in the dome. Blanket tucked around her. Telescope humming softly beside her. She didn't try to dream. She just felt. And as she drifted, she remembered the first time she looked through a telescope. How it wasn't the stars she noticed, but the space between them. So wide. So gentle. So forgiving. In her dream, she saw the world like a soft nightlight. Spinning slowly, covered in tiny spirals of light. Each one. A person. A hope. A whisper. Each one. Glowing. With a single quiet question. Am I being heard? And the spiral's answer was always the same. Yes. I hear you. I'm with you. When Leia awoke, she found a small shell outside the observatory door. Perfectly intact. Curled like a spiral. She hadn't placed it there. No one had been by. But the message was clear. It's listening. It always has been. The night of 1,000 whispers. It began with candles. Just a few. Left burning on windowsills in Belgium. Placed gently on sidewalks in India. Set afloat in bowls of water in Indonesia. Where the breeze didn't blow them out. The candles were part of something new. Something unspoken. Something quietly growing. No one had organized it. No one had even announced it. And yet, on the first night of the new moon, people all across the world gathered under open skies, with spirals drawn on their palms. Some chalked them on park benches. Others traced them in flour on bread. One little girl wore hers in her braid, woven with silver thread. No speeches. No ceremonies. Just presence. And stillness. As if they had all received the same dream. At the same time. Leia first heard about it from a child. A handwritten letter, sealed in purple wax. "Dear sleepy scientist," it read. "We are staying up tonight. My mom says the stars will blink like they're listening. She says the spiral doesn't need a telescope anymore. She says it needs our hearts." Attached was a crayon drawing. A circle of people lying in a field. Hands connected. A spiral floating above them like a moon made of breath. When night fell, Leia stepped outside. She expected darkness. But the hills around the observatory flickered with soft lights. Lanterns, fireflies, flashlights covered in scarves. People had come. Not just locals. Some she recognized from the sleep gathering. Some were strangers. One woman had traveled from Istanbul by train. Just to dream beneath the telescope. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. They simply lay on blankets. Hands facing skyward. Eyes half closed. Listening. And slowly. The spiral came. Not above them. Among them. It shimmered in the way breath curled in the air. In the shared rhythm of heartbeats. In the way children began to hum the same tune. Without being taught. Leia walked between them. And felt the pulse rise from the earth itself. Like memory returning to soil. This is how it speaks now. She thought. Not in light. Not in logic. In togetherness. Around the world, similar gatherings bloomed. In the Sahara. Nomads circled tiny fires and whispered old stories. That suddenly seemed new. In Norway, families sat on snowbanks. Sharing silence like soup. In Brazil, dancers moved in slow spirals. Barefoot in the night. Letting music carry what words never could. Each gathering unplanned. Each one different. And yet. The same. A quiet yearning answered. A soft question held in the palm of a stranger's hand. Leia didn't sleep that night. She sat beside the telescope. Not looking through it. But leaning against it. Like an old friend. Around her, the world glowed with a new kind of connection. One that didn't require explanation. Only presence. And above, the stars didn't shine brighter. But they somehow felt closer. She picked up her journal. And with a steady hand, wrote. It's not a discovery anymore. It's a return. We're spiraling back to something we've always been. Then, smiling softly, she added. Tonight, the world dreamed together. The spiral turns inward. It was a child again. A boy named Samir. From a sleepy coastal town in Tunisia. 8 years old, soft-spoken. Always walking barefoot. Even in winter. He had not attended the gatherings. He had never seen a telescope. But one morning. His mother found him sitting quietly on the steps. Eyes wide and still. Hands resting in his lap. "Did you sleep well?" she asked. He nodded once. Then said softly, as if remembering more than he understood, "The spiral turned around last night. It went in. Not out. And I followed it all the way to the middle." She asked him what was there, at the center. Samir blinked. And smiled. Me. The story reached Leia 2 days later. Sent through a quiet message from the boy's uncle, who had once dreamed of spirals himself. The moment she read it, her chest tightened. It wasn't fear, but a kind of anticipation. Like hearing a door slowly creak open. To a room you'd always walked past, but never dared enter. That night, Leia returned to the dome. Not with her telescope, but with her breath. She closed her eyes, lay down beneath the open hatch, and whispered, "If it's changing, show me." Sleep took her quickly. But this time, the dream was not floating. It was falling. Not frightening. Just deep. Like water pulling her gently downward. Into stillness. She saw the spiral again. But not as a ribbon in the stars. This time, it was made of memories. Faces. Moments. Every thought she'd ever hidden from herself. And instead of drifting outward, toward the universe, it pulled inward, curling softly into her own chest. And at the center, a small, glowing version of herself, curled up like a child asleep in a galaxy. She reached toward it, and it opened its eyes, and whispered the most unexpected thing. "Thank you for coming back." When she awoke, she didn't cry. She exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath her whole life. Without knowing it, the stars above were quiet. But inside her, a new kind of sky had opened. Not one of discovery. One of return. She wrote in her journal, "The spiral is no longer a path through space. It is a path through self. It led us outward, so we could remember how to go in." Over the next few weeks, more children began reporting the same shift. Dreams of spirals moving inward. Circles that looped back into the heart. Music that ended on the same note where it began. One child in New Zealand wrote, "I dreamed of the spiral. And it took me to my own thoughts. Some were soft. Some were loud. But they were all mine. And when I listened, they stopped being scary." The spiral wasn't leaving. It was evolving. No longer a signal. Now, an invitation. To sit with ourselves. To listen inwardly. To find the center we'd forgotten was always there. That night, Leia lit a candle at the center of the observatory. Not to summon anything, but to welcome what was already within. And with a calm smile, she whispered, "We've looked at the stars for so long. Maybe now, it's time to look through them. And into ourselves." The spiral's shadow. The dreams began to shift. Not all at once. Not to everyone. But enough that Leia noticed. People wrote to her in quieter voices. Their messages felt heavier. Not hopeless. Just more honest. A woman from Argentina described a dream, where the spiral took her not into the stars, but into a room full of locked boxes. Each one had a name. Memories she'd buried. Feelings she'd hidden. "I didn't want to open them," she wrote. But the spiral didn't make me. It just sat beside me. And waited. Others described similar dreams. Not of galaxies, But childhood homes. Old arguments. Faces of people they hadn't thought about in years. The spiral was no longer just out there. Or above them. Now it was guiding them. Into the places they'd quietly left behind. And it never forced. It only invited. Softly. Patiently. Like a teacher who knows. The hardest lessons are the ones we give ourselves. Leia, too, dreamed differently. One night, she followed the inward spiral again. But this time, instead of starlight, she found a dark hallway. Empty frames on the walls. Doors that looked familiar. But wouldn't open unless she knocked first. She hesitated. "I'm not afraid," she told herself. Just uncertain. That was when the spiral appeared again. This time, in the shape of a lantern. Resting in her hand. It didn't light the whole hallway. Only a few steps ahead. "That's all you need." A voice whispered inside her. Just enough to keep going. The next morning, she wrote in her journal. The spiral is not only showing us what we love. It's showing us what we hide. Not to punish us. But to help us return whole. Word spread. The world had been enchanted by the spiral. Its peace, its beauty, its gentleness. Now it was showing them something else. The work. The healing. The part of the dream. That comes after the wonder. And yet, something amazing happened. People didn't run away. They began to gather differently. In Germany, people met in old churches. And shared the dreams they were ashamed of. In Ghana, families lit candles. For ancestors they'd never spoken of. In Tokyo, people wrote letters. To their past selves. And folded them into tiny spirals of paper. They kept close to their hearts. A movement was forming. Not in fear. But in facing. The spiral had led them to the stars. But now, it was gently leading them. Back through their own wounds. Together. And still, it remained kind. Still, it never forced. It simply waited. In the places that had been forgotten. Patient as moonlight. That night, Leia stood at the top of the observatory. And looked out over the hills. No one else was there. No spiral in the sky. No gathering in the grass. Just quiet. She took a breath. Closed her eyes. And said aloud. "Thank you for not being only light. Thank you for showing us we don't have to be either." Borrowed dreams. The first letter arrived by hand. No stamp. No signature. Just 6 words, written in careful pencil. "I dreamed your memory last night." Leia turned the paper over. Nothing on the back. No hint of who had written it. She might have dismissed it. Except that, on that very night, she had dreamed of a moment. She had never spoken aloud. Her 7th birthday. The one where no one came. Where she sat with a paper crown in an empty room. Watching the candle melt sideways. On a single slice of cake. The next day, more messages came. From strangers. From friends. From people she'd never met. Claiming to have seen. Snapshots of each other's lives. While they slept. Not in symbols. Not in metaphor. Real moments. An old man in Seoul. Who dreamed of being a girl in Nigeria. Carrying water on her head under a laughing sky. A mother in Montreal. Who saw herself as a child in Nepal. Watching snowfall for the first time. With wide, trembling eyes. A teacher in Dublin. Who lived, for one dream night. as a prisoner once held in silence. And woke weeping. Not from sadness, but from sudden, soft understanding. Leia called it the dream fold. Not a crossing. Not a trick. But a gentle overlap. A soft swirl in time. Where the spiral brought people. Not into the stars. But into each other. At first, it confused the world. How could strangers dream of things they'd never lived? But slowly, fear gave way to awe. Because these weren't nightmares. They weren't invasions. They were borrowed moments. And they always came with one thing. Empathy. In Morocco, a young boy wrote, "I dreamed I was my grandfather. Not when he was young. But now. I felt his back pain. And how his hands shake. When he tries to write. And I wasn't scared. I just loved him more." It wasn't just across cultures. It was across time. One woman dreamed of her mother. As a teenager. Painting murals no one had ever told her about. Another dreamed of her future daughter. Singing a lullaby she didn't yet know. The spiral had turned inward. And now. It was turning shared. Not a path. Not a map. But a web. And each dream. Each life. A glowing thread. Leia stood in the dome one evening. Not alone now. But surrounded by others who had gathered to share. They didn't call themselves scientists. Or believers. Or prophets. Just dreamers. Together, they mapped stories on the walls. Moments. Shared visions. Soft echoes. And in the center of the room. A spiral drawn in chalk. No one had made it. It had simply appeared. Before bed, Leia opened her journal. Asterisk, the spiral has moved beyond discovery. Now it weaves us together. Moment by moment. Dream by dream. Asterisk. Asterisk, maybe this is what the universe wanted us to see all along. That we are not just looking into space. We are the space within each other. Asterisk. And for the first time in a long while. She slept without a question. Only wonder. Speaking without words. By now, the world had changed. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But deeply. Like rain softening stone. Like roots weaving quietly beneath cities. People had begun doing something new. Sending dreams to each other. Not through machines. Not through magic. But through stillness, intention, and trust. It started in a quiet mountain village in Bhutan. A girl named Tashi, age 11. Sat beside her grandfather one night. And said, "I'm going to send you a dream tonight. It won't be in words. Just a feeling. I want you to tell me what it is when you wake up." Her grandfather smiled. Kissed her forehead. And promised to remember. In the morning, he looked at her with tears in his eyes. "I dreamed of the last time we walked to the river together. You were still little. And you gave me a pebble. Shaped like a heart." Tashi nodded. "That's the dream I sent." Across the world, others began trying too. Not just family. Strangers. Teachers and students. Old friends who had grown distant. Before sleep, they would sit quietly. Hold the thought of a memory. Or a feeling. Or a simple image. And silently offer it to the spiral. And more often than not, the dream was received. A young man in Greece sent the feeling of forgiveness. To the brother he hadn't spoken to in years. The next morning, he found a message. "I don't know why, but I woke up peaceful. And I thought of you." A woman in Chile dreamt of standing On a rainy street in Tokyo. She described it in a dream journal. 2 days later, a man in Tokyo found the journal online. It described the exact moment. He had stood in that very street, crying for reasons he couldn't explain. "Thank you," he wrote. "Now I know someone was with me." Leia watched it unfold with quiet wonder. The spiral hadn't just changed how people dreamt. It had changed how they reached for each other. No more needing the right words. No more fear of saying too much. Or not enough. Now they shared what couldn't be said. Only felt. One night, the dreamers gathered in the observatory. They sat in silence. Each person closed their eyes and chose a single image. A color. A sound. A memory. A kindness. They didn't speak. They simply breathed it into the spiral. And when they awoke, each one had received a piece of someone else's heart. Not a copy. Not a translation. A felt truth. Leia wrote in her journal. We used to think connection meant explaining ourselves. But now we see. True connection happens when we allow ourselves to be felt. Just as we are. The spiral is not teaching us to speak. It's teaching us to listen. With the whole soul. And so, a new language bloomed. Not spoken. Not written. But dreamed. The dream that held everyone. The night it happened, the world felt unusually quiet. No storms. No unrest. No headlines screaming through screens. Just stillness. A kind of hush. That felt like the universe holding its breath. Leia sensed it before it began. She stood in the observatory, watching the sky through the open hatch. And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like the stars were above her. She felt like they were waiting. For what, she didn't yet know. But she whispered anyway. "We're listening." That night, across the globe, millions of people fell asleep at once. Some by choice. Some simply drifting off. As if lulled by something unseen. They didn't dream of old memories. Or quiet spirals. Or borrowed feelings. They dreamed of the same place. It was a vast field. Endless. Bathed in a gentle silver blue light. The grass didn't move in the wind. There was no wind. And overhead, no moon. No sun. Only the stars. More of them than anyone had ever seen. Burning so softly. They looked like lanterns made of breath. And in the center of the field, a spiral. Larger than any they had ever known. Formed not of light, but of people. All standing together. All facing inward. All part of the same slow turning. Leia stood among them. She recognized faces from every continent. Children. Elders. Strangers she had only met in dreams. All silent. All calm. No one spoke. But no one needed to. Because above them, the stars began to shift. Not fall. Not flicker. Shift. Rearranging. Forming shapes. Then lines. Then words. The message was not in any single language. And yet, every dreamer understood. It said, "You are not alone. You have never been. The spiral was never outside you. It was always what you shared. Now you remember." As the words faded, something strange and beautiful happened. Each person in the dream began to glow. Not blindingly. Not brightly. Just a soft radiance. A shimmer. Like light through leaves. And from above, the spiral became complete. No longer made of stars. Or symbols. Or dreams. But of us. A turning, breathing truth. Humanity, finally still. Finally connected. Not through power. Through presence. When the world awoke, many wept. Not from fear. Not even from joy. But from knowing. Knowing they had seen the same dream. Knowing they had stood in the same place. At the same moment. And knowing the spiral was now part of them. Not as a visitor. But as a rhythm. They would carry forever. Leia sat in the observatory. Watching dawn rise over the hills. She didn't take notes. She didn't speak. She simply placed a hand over her heart. Closed her eyes. And whispered. We remember now. We are the spiral. A new kind of daylight. The shared dream had passed like a soft tide. No alarms. No earthquakes. Just a universal stillness. That left behind something deep. And unseen. But felt. When morning came. The world did not return to what it had been. It didn't rush. It didn't shout. It paused. And that pause began to spread. In a small town in Denmark. A schoolteacher unlocked the classroom door. And didn't begin the lesson. Instead, she invited her students to sit in a circle, barefoot. And each shared how they had slept. No grades. No chalkboards. Just quiet connection. And when one child said they dreamed of rain falling upward into the stars, no one laughed. They simply nodded. Like that made perfect sense. In a crowded Mumbai office, the manager dimmed the lights at noon. Just for 10 minutes. No one spoke. They simply breathed. Together. And afterward, they worked slower. Better. Kinder. Someone even brewed tea. For a coworker they had never spoken to before. You look like your thoughts are heavy, they said. Let the spiral hold them a while. In Brazil, artists began painting spirals. On the roofs of buses. Not slogans. Not branding. Just slow, sweeping shapes. That reminded everyone stuck in traffic. To breathe. To be. The spiral hadn't asked them to change. Hadn't commanded. Hadn't spoken. But something in its silence had echoed deep into the fabric of daily life. People stopped measuring days by productivity and started measuring them by presence. Leia watched the changes bloom like spring across the world. One evening, a delivery man arrived at her observatory with a package. Before leaving, he paused and said, I don't rush anymore. I used to count how many stops I made. Now I count how many faces smiled when I said hello. He left before she could answer. But she didn't need to. The spiral had already spoken to him. In the way that mattered. At night, cities looked different too. Streetlights were softer. Cafes stayed open just to let people sit. Without buying anything. Parks were filled with quiet gatherings. Not protests. Not parties. Just people dreaming together under open skies. Even noise began to change. It didn't disappear. But it softened. Laughter replaced honking. Footsteps became rhythms. And silence was no longer awkward. It was sacred. Leia wrote in her journal. **, the spiral has entered waking life now. Not as a force. As a feeling. Asterisk. Not every building must change. But how we breathe inside them must. She looked up at the stars. Still there. Still burning. But now. They didn't seem distant. They felt like old friends. Watching humanity finally remember how to be gentle with itself. The spiral beneath our feet. The world had begun to breathe slower. Shops opened later. Children napped in sunbeams. Dream-sharing circles were as common as markets. It was as if life had remembered its natural rhythm. A rhythm with space. And kindness. But slowly, across distant corners of the earth, a new feeling began to rise. Not urgency. Not anxiety. Just a quiet, collective whisper. What now? Where do we go from here? Leia felt it too. One evening, standing at the observatory window, she looked up at the sky. No spiral, no dreams. And asked softly, "Are we finished?" That night, the spiral didn't come in the stars. It came beneath her pillow. A dream unlike any she had known. No skies. No galaxies. Just dirt. Stone. And a deep, humming pulse. Coming from beneath the earth. When she woke, she found her boots muddy. The soles damp. As if she'd walked through wet caves while sleeping. And on her bedside table, a small stone, smooth and spiral-shaped. Not placed. Not dropped. Given. Around the world. Similar stories emerged. Miners in Peru reported strange dreams. Of light pulsing inside the mountains. Children in Iceland dug tiny holes. And found ancient bones. Shaped like curled shells. Fossils from lives long extinct. But somehow, familiar. In the Congo, a woman tending a well said the water began to glow faintly. Just before dawn. As if remembering something. The spiral had shifted again. This time, downward. Not into memories. Not into sleep. But into the deep time. That lives beneath every step we take. Leia followed the dream's pull. She and a small group of quiet thinkers began exploring caves, old quarries, and untouched forests. They didn't search with machines. They listened. And in one ancient cavern in Turkey, they found it. A spiral carved into stone. Thousands of years old. Perfectly symmetrical. Untouched by weather. And beneath it, words in no known language. But every dreamer could understand them. Before the stars, there was the earth. Before the telescope, there was listening. Asterisk, the spiral was never a message from far away. It was a memory, buried within you. Asterisk. Leia sat in silence for hours beside that stone. She didn't try to interpret. She didn't try to explain. She simply placed her hand over the spiral. Closed her eyes. And felt the heartbeat of the world beneath her palm. It was slow. Steady. Alive. When she returned home, she didn't write in her journal. She knelt on the floor of the observatory. Pressed her ear to the ground. And whispered, "Thank you." And from somewhere beneath her, not in words, but in warmth, came the answer. You were never separate. The shape of silence. There were no more dreams for a while. Not of spirals. Not of stars. Not of caves glowing in the dark. Just sleep. Plain and quiet. Like the pause between notes in a song. And at first, people grew worried. Had the spiral left? Had the story ended? But Leia felt something different. She felt held. Like the world wasn't waiting for the next message, but being gently reminded to listen to what had already been given. In the silence, something unexpected began to happen. People slowed even more. They stopped filling the quiet with questions, or movement, or noise. Instead, they began to sit in it, to rest in it. And as they did, they noticed something. The silence wasn't empty. It had texture, and weight, and shape. In a library in Morocco, a poet closed her notebook and sat for hours without writing. When she finally picked up her pen, all she wrote was, "Silence is a spiral too." In Ghana, two strangers sat side by side on a bench for hours. They never spoke. They simply looked out at the river. Later, one of them would say, "I learned more from that silence than from any conversation I've had in years." Children began practicing something new. They called it the spiral sit. They would gather in circles, close their eyes, and try to listen not for sounds, but for what wasn't being said. And what they heard was extraordinary. The way their own breath felt. The way the earth seemed to hum. The way stillness had a rhythm all its own. One child described it like this: "It's like the quiet between waves at the beach. You know more is coming. But that space in between, that's where the real magic lives." Leia, too, embraced the silence. Each night, she would lie beside the telescope, not using it, just resting her head against its side, feeling the quiet weight of the universe above her. And one evening, without warning, she heard it. Not with ears, not with thought, but deep in the chest. A pulse, like distant thunder wrapped in light. A soundless sound. A message that was not a message, but a knowing. And it said, "This stillness is not the end of the story. It is the breath between chapters." Leia smiled. She finally understood. The spiral hadn't stopped speaking. It had simply begun to speak. In the one language humanity had forgotten. Silence. She opened her journal. And this time, she didn't write a paragraph. Or a poem. Just one line. Asterisk, when we stop filling the quiet, we hear the spiral whisper back. Asterisk. The body remembers. At first, it was subtle. A girl in Thailand, dancing alone beneath moonlight, began to move in slow spirals. Arms curling in patterns she didn't recognize. Feet tracing ancient symbols into the soil. "I wasn't thinking," she told her teacher. "It just felt natural. Like the moon was inside my body." Soon after, a violinist in Poland began playing unfamiliar melodies. They didn't follow any scale. And yet they felt familiar. To everyone who heard them. The audience sat in perfect stillness. Eyes closed. Breathing together. As if the music had tapped into something ancient and shared. It wasn't a song, she later said. It was a memory of sound. Stories poured in. Movements. Gestures. Moments of stillness that weren't taught, but inherited. Doctors began to notice something strange. Heartbeat patterns among those who had shared dreams began to align, subtly echoing the spiral's curve. When charted on paper, even breath changed. People found themselves inhaling and exhaling, in soft rhythms that mirrored galaxies. Fibonacci. Golden spirals. Not forced. Not trained. Just remembered. Leia felt it too. One evening, as she walked alone through a quiet forest. Her feet began to turn. First left, then right. Curling gently into a spiral path. She didn't resist. She closed her eyes. Let her arms rise and fall like waves. Her fingers painting invisible shapes in the air. And as she moved, she felt the universe moving through her. Not above. Not outside. Within. That night, she dreamed not of stars or caves, but of a child in the womb. Not a specific child. A symbol. Floating peacefully. Its spine curled into a perfect spiral. As if the shape of the cosmos had been the shape of life. All along. When she awoke, she whispered, "It's in us. It always was." Scientists began confirming what dreamers had felt. The spiral existed in DNA. In seashells. In pine cones. In weather patterns. And in movement. From the first heartbeat to the final breath. The body lives by spiral logic. It turns. It folds. It blooms. Workshops began, not with lectures, but with spiral walking. Spiral dancing. Spiral drawing in sand or snow. No teaching. Just remembering. Leia wrote in her journal. We spent centuries building machines to look outward. But the deepest telescope has always been the body. The spiral lives in our bones. And now, we are letting it move us again. The body remembers. It began with movement. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just, different. At first, no one noticed. A child tracing circles in the sand without knowing why. A dancer spinning slowly in widening arcs. A teacher who found herself swaying gently while speaking. As if her body had its own tide. Then more came. In rural Japan, an elderly man walking through his garden paused, looked down, and realized. His footprints made a spiral in the frost. "I wasn't thinking," he said. "But my body knew the way." In Argentina, a musician strummed a pattern that no scale could name. When asked what it was, she only smiled. "It's what my hands remembered." Soon, people across the world began to notice that their movements, their gestures, habits, even their breathing, were subtly changing. Not becoming artificial or strange, but returning to something old. Something soft and spiraling. Doctors began studying dreamers' heart rhythms. One team in South Korea published a report. "We found that their heartbeats were following spiral intervals. A pulsing echo of the same golden ratio. Found in galaxies, whirlpools, and DNA. People weren't becoming new. They were becoming true." Leia felt it too. She would walk through the hills at dusk. No path, no destination. Just moving in slow loops. Her arms swinging in widening arcs. Her breath rising and falling like waves. She no longer reached for the stars with questions. She became the question. And the spiral inside her became the answer. One night, she dreamt she was a child again. Floating inside her mother's womb. Her spine curled gently like a fern. The world was quiet. Dark. Safe. And somewhere beyond the dream, a voice whispered. You were born in spirals. You will return in spirals. You are never separate from them. When she woke, she placed her hand over her heart and traced a spiral into her chest, feeling it echo back with every beat. This is not just memory, she thought. It is design. It is destiny. People began gathering again. But not to talk. To move. They called it spiral memory. Circles formed in fields and quiet city parks. Some danced. Some swayed. Some simply stood still, letting the spiral unwind through their posture, their breathing, their bones. And no one taught them how. Because the spiral was never something to learn. Only something to remember. Leia wrote in her journal. The spiral lives in galaxies. In fossils. In time. But most sacred of all. It lives inside us. The second shape. The sky changed again. Not suddenly. Not loudly. But unmistakably. One evening, as dusk slid quietly across the observatory hills, Leia looked up and saw it. The spiral had returned. Its soft, glowing swirl nestled in the night sky. Like a sleeping galaxy. But next to it, a new shape had appeared. Not a spiral. Not a star. Something more subtle. Two curved lines. Looping around each other. Never touching. Like a gentle braid of light. Across the world, eyes lifted upward. People who had grown used to the spiral's rhythm now stood in silence. As the new shape slowly pulsed beside it. It wasn't threatening. It wasn't cold. It was inviting. Like a hand reaching out. Or two rivers bending together through a valley. In dream circles and quiet cities. The whispers began. It's another pattern. A twin. A partner. A mirror. Scientists tried to define it. Some said it was a double helix. Like DNA. Others saw the infinity loop. A symbol of balance. Of something endless. Some children simply called it the gentle two. But what mattered more than its name was how it made people feel. Where the spiral had awakened wonder. This new shape stirred something else. Belonging. A woman in Tunisia wrote. When I saw it, I felt like someone had been waiting for me. In the sky. Not to teach me. Not to test me. Just to walk beside me. People began dreaming of pairs. Two dancers. Two stars. Two hands. One offering. One receiving. And in every dream, the spiral was there too. Not fading. Not overshadowed. Completing. Leia watched the two shapes each night. Side by side. Curving gently toward each other. But never colliding. She began to feel a question form in her heart. One she couldn't quite name. And then, one night, the answer came. Not in a dream. But in her breath. As she exhaled, she felt it. Inhale, spiral. Exhale, braid. Receive. Return. Wonder. Belonging. Two truths. One life. People began placing both shapes side by side. In artwork, in sand, on windows. Not as decorations. But as reminders. That we are more than seekers. We are pairs of something ancient. Thought and feeling. Light and gravity. Self and other. Leia wrote in her journal. The spiral showed us how to look beyond. The second shape shows us how to return. One brings vision. The other brings home. And for the first time, the sky felt complete. Not finished. But whole. Two lights. Two rhythms. One shared breath. Between the stars. And the hearts watching below. The dream we build together. The sky had settled. Two symbols now glowed gently each night. The spiral and the braid. The seeker and the home. The movement and the stillness. But now the question returned. Softly. Lovingly. What will you do with what you've been given? It came first as a whisper. Then a feeling. Then, slowly, a call that touched dreamers around the world. Tonight, it said. We do not just dream. We build. That night, millions lay down not to sleep, but to enter. They weren't dreaming in solitude anymore. They were stepping together into the same space. The shared field of stars. Now glowing with a deeper pulse. It wasn't like before. The field had changed. Where once stood a single spiral. And then two lights. Now there was space. Empty, open space. Waiting. One by one, the dreamers began to shape it. Not with bricks. Not with blueprints. But with memory. With vision. With kindness. One child dreamed of a school. With no walls, only trees and wind. Where questions floated like birds. And no one was ever rushed. A grandmother dreamed of a city. Where people traded stories instead of money. And meals were long, slow, and always shared. Someone dreamed of a library made of water. Someone else, of bridges made from singing light. Leia stood in the dream too. Not as a guide. Not as a scientist. As a builder. She closed her eyes and placed her hands on the dream soil. From her fingers bloomed a spiral-shaped garden. Flowers that whispered lullabies. And trees that bent low enough to hug children who passed. And nearby, a soft shape wove itself into the dream sky. The braid, glowing gently. Inviting everyone to remember. We do not dream alone. As the night went on, the dream grew larger. Not chaotic. Not wild. Just, alive. A village. A song. A language with no words. Woven entirely from hope. When morning came, people woke gently. Their bodies lighter. Their hearts full. They didn't rush. They didn't explain. But they knew. Something had changed. They had been allowed to create something real. Not in stone or code. But in soul. And slowly, the waking world began to shift again. Communities painted their walls with dream colors. People built gardens based on the ones they had seen while sleeping. Meetings began with silence. Cities added benches in strange, spiral shapes. Not for efficiency, but for gathering. And the world began to look. A little more. Like the dream. That night, Leia opened her journal for the final time before the next chapter. She didn't write a lesson. She didn't write a discovery. Just a sentence. Spoken softly into the page. We are ready now. After the spiral. The spiral no longer needed to appear. It had done what it came to do. It had been seen. Then felt. Then remembered. Then lived. And now, it became what all true things become. Invisible, but ever present. The stars still burned. But they no longer seemed distant. Not foreign. Not unreachable. They were reflections. Of our thoughts. Our patterns. Our dreams. And the telescope? It stayed right where it had always been. But now, fewer people used it to look out. More sat beside it. To look in. Leia stood at the observatory door one final time. She no longer brought notebooks or questions. Just herself. And the feeling that the world had shifted. She looked at the hills below. Children tracing spirals in sand. A group of elders humming beneath a banyan tree. A pair of dancers moving in the rhythm of the braid. And she smiled.